episode of the Pro Physique Code. This is Coach Christina, and we've got Coach Stephen, and then we have our special guest, Coach Adam, today. And we are going to be diving into some of the information he's learned with his research regarding wearable devices, specifically the Whoop and the Oura Ring. And I know that last year, actually, how long were you in this like research bubble for this one specifically, Adam?
Yeah, literally, it was a year. I had piloted you for the eye guide right before we went to Denver, and then we had a conversation in Denver, and then you were like, "Screw this boot band."
I know. It was so sad because I was like obsessed with it. So it's funny because I haven't had one since I think I stopped using it in like December. And then that was when I signed up for the marathon I ran this year. And that's when I was like, okay, I'll just get a Garmin. And so had transitioned mostly because it linked up well with my coach's programming. It would like upload to my Garmin right away. But I did get the one that still does like HRV and like sleep stuff and all of that. And it's funny because my bed, did I tell you about this? I got the Sleep Number bed that claims that it knows my HRV and like everything like that too, which is just bonkers that it thinks it knows anything. Because after our conversation, I'm like, they're all stupid and I can't like take them seriously anymore. But I was very deep into the wearable hole. And I mean, we talked about kind of like with where you went with your research and like what purpose they served for people and stuff. I think there were some positives. And then I think I also took some stuff too seriously. So then we were talking earlier about how Stephen currently has an Oura and then has the Samsung watch. And so did your Samsung watch do HRV and stuff like that too?
I'm not sure if it does it currently because I didn't actually pay attention.
The Apple
when I
Watch
ordered it.
doesn't. And so that was one of the reasons I got a Whoop, was because the Apple Watch didn't.
Yeah, I think the initial reason I got the Oura Ring was for the stuff like HRV, and then like the sleep score stuff because I didn't feel like the sleep score was as indicative. I had like the original Samsung watch forever back in the day. And then I also realized that there's always a difference in terms of my step count between like my watch and like if I was hanging out with Chloe, like her step count on her Oura Ring would be over, even though we did all the same stuff the entire same day. So there would just be different numbers. So I was like, all right, well,
talk with our hands a lot, being French.
I don't know. I feel like she's actually pretty quiet a lot of the time, to be honest, when I've traveled with her. Yeah, it's just so I kind of wanted to do it to look at some other things that I didn't feel like I was getting from the Samsung watch, which is, probably why part of the criteria for them being involved in the research study that you guys ran on the wearables was that they are, and I'm going to air quote here. So for all my patio people, yeah, we brought that back. So this is recording number 2, by the way. This is our second run.
We had technical difficulties, so you guys missed out on at least one awkward moment.
Yes. But then my internet died, so it was a perfect time to restart anyways. And I was like, all right, let's go. But part of the whole thing was that they have to measure the HRV or measure, there's my air quotes, the HRV.
Like readiness and stuff like that, right?
Right. So talk to us kind of about why you were looking at that readiness score and the HRV and even what kind of the confidence is in the HRV that you guys have at this point, like with the current body of research and what you guys were looking at.
Yeah, so I guess to almost give a nice background of why the Oura Ring and the Whoop band was because our lab specifically utilizes the framework of auto-regulation. So auto-regulation is just a fancy term of being reactive to your programming, whether that is a different modality of exercise, resistance training via aerobic exercise, walking, running, or even flexibility, because I think that's, a fitness component that is left off the table for a lot of people, or they think it's not exercise because it doesn't feel like exercise, if that makes sense, right? I'm not sore, I'm not sweaty, so that wasn't a workout. But flexibility, and we can go down that rabbit hole, is a fitness component that we should pay attention to. But auto-regulation, the like quote unquote formula for it, for being dynamic as it is, leaches onto the readiness. So we wanted to understand how people are already utilizing a metric from a wearable device that, again, in theory, is giving you some sort of proxy to how recovered or how ready you are to perform an exercise session. So, you know, in theory, for you to get the best heart rate variability measurement, you need like an EKG. But with all of these technological advancements, we're able to really, I guess, have infrared light and measure it that way. Is it the best? There's, studies out there that say yes, but they're also funded by Oura Ring and Whoop Band. So take that with a grain of salt. And others would say, they're reliable, right? If they're going to be wrong, they're going to continuously be wrong. And I think, again, our subjective qualitative investigation, so interviewing these people that, hey, you get the score, how or why, or what are you doing with it, can kind of understand, again, they're reliable. They can do something for us, and we can learn from that. I think, again, as technology continuously, reinvents itself or continuously progresses, these things will get a little bit more quote unquote accurate, but they're never going to be perfect. And that was one finding that people continuously reiterate is like, it says I feel this, but I don't feel this. But again, it's a wearable. It's not God. I'm not going to give it the all end all be all.
Yeah. And for those of you wondering, so when we talk about reliability and research, think of it as you're stepping on a different scale and it gives you a number that's 20 pounds off. But every time you step on that scale, it gives you the same number that's 20 pounds off. It's continually reliable. It might not be accurate, or your other scale might not be accurate, but it's giving you the same measurement over and over. So knowing that it's going to at least give you that same consistent measurement over and over, whether or not it's accurate or not. And so we like to separate those two things when we talk about that reliability and the accuracy, or I forget the other word for it. It's been a little while. When we're talking research, and Adam may hit some very technical research terms. So if he does, we'll try and kind of like pull him back, because what we talked about earlier was that you guys didn't hear was that there can be a lot of very technical jargon in research that makes it difficult to interpret or understand. And the reason is because it has to be very, very defined, so that way we know all the things are controlled for as much as we can control, and we are looking at very specific things. And if you don't do that, well, then your research has holes in it, essentially. So it becomes more correlation as opposed to, okay, and even so, yes, there's research that will be correlative. Well, I think that's better. Where it's still correlation that we're showing, but we're determining that correlation exists between these specific variables. There's not a lot of openings where other things could be impacting that as well. And that's what we're trying to control. And that's why sometimes research can be tough. And dude, even for me, there are times where I have to go in and Google some words when I'm reading through a paper.
I still run into that as well, man. And I think you taking the initial step of like, hey, I don't know what that word is, rather than brushing it off and getting into that rabbit hole, is, again, only going to refine you as a reader. But I think, what my primary goal with, specifically qualitative research, because we're not really controlling for much. I guess we're controlling the individuals that we're recruiting, but it's really the phenomenon of interest. And the phenomenon of interest here was the wearable device. Like, how are people utilizing this? Why are people utilizing this? And was there any negative, occurrences or experiences with that? So I'm not really controlling, and especially qualitative research, you're just exploring. You're really trying to understand a specific phenomenon. And it's not going to pinpoint, well, X causes Y or any correlation. It's just guiding me to, refine my other project that I'm going to have, coming up soon.
Right. But in this case, we are only looking at Whoop and Oura Ring. So my Samsung watch may not even be reasonable to think about in terms of falling into the same category for what we're necessarily talking about today. Your Apple Watch may not necessarily facilitate the same thing, because it's not maybe looking at heart rate variability. And so it may be giving you scores, it may be telling you some things, but it's not going to necessarily be the same thing that we're talking about today based on like HRV.
Right.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So
Oh, go ahead. Go, Stephen.
Oh, I was gonna say, so in terms of HRV, because it's something we throw out, it's very popularized right now. What is even like the difference? Why do we care about HRV, and like what's good HRV, what's bad HRV? Like what's the typical like guidelines of that?
Well, in theory, HRV is supposed to pick up on psychological, physiological, and environmental stressors. And then you had asked, what is a good or a bad HRV? Well, that's going to obviously be dependent on the individual. But in theory, right, general terms, a higher HRV, so you have more, I guess, time between your beats, is better, right? Because that is saying that you're relying more on your parasympathetic nervous system. So again, your rest and digest system, and you're not in this heightened stress mode. But if you're not able to, again, respond to a certain stimulus, you're going to have, a shorter, I guess, response within your heart rate, which in theory would suggest that, hey, you're stressed, you're not handling things correctly. But, I've seen scores in the 50s for one individual, and I've seen scores in the teens for one individual. So I can't give you hard objective numbers, but just know the higher, typically that's the better, saying that you're more recovered, you're more relaxed, and you're not in this fight or flight state all the time.
That's one thing that when my husband had a whoop, it drove him bonkers when we would like wake up in the morning and see our scores, because he's like, I'm somebody who puts effort into like being in shape, and like we go to bed at the same time and like all of this. And his HRV would always come back like in the teens. Like I don't think he ever exceeded like 25. And I would wake up and be like, oh, mine was 97 last night. Like something crazy. And it drove him nuts that he could not get like a different score. And I think that was the hard thing too with like the Whoop interface, was that it was constantly telling him that everything was fucked. Like it didn't really like adjust to be like, okay, well, you're somebody whose baseline is here. And that he would wake up and it would be like your HRV is in the bottom 10% of people, in your age group or something like that, nonstop. And it was enough to where he was like, screw this thing, and didn't want it anymore.
And that's funny how it does that, because the whole like concept of these wearables is I'm going to learn who you are as we continuously collect data. But again, from an educational standpoint, for somebody, I don't care if they're fit or they're unfit, but if you're continuously getting that feedback of, hey, you suck, or hey, you're not recovered, you're going to start really doubting what you're doing. And we've continuously seen this in other aspects of self-monitoring with the scale, right? People step on the scale. Oh my gosh, it's up 10 pounds. I'm not going to do anything. Or, hey, I'm up or I'm down 10 pounds. But, I fasted, a lot yesterday. So I'm going to continuously do that. And it's feeding, these negative behaviors in theory. So again, it could be detrimental especially if we're not understanding the bigger picture. And that's, again, the phenomenon of interest. It's like, hey, they're taking this big construct of readiness and recovery. How are you actually handling that?
Yeah. And so you guys kind of broke that out into like three major like pieces generally for how you were kind of defining that, right? So talk maybe a little bit about what you guys define that as in terms of those major aspects and kind of what you were seeing there.
Are you talking about the themes
like
that we
positive,
found?
like how they were using those and how they felt about them? Like, hey, like this is good. It helps me to auto-regulate my training so that I can like maybe pull back a little bit
Okay.
more. Or like I
Yeah.
didn't feel like it was correct.
Gotcha. Yeah. So we had about, I think it was 17 individuals that, were qualified for the study. They agreed to be in the study, and we interviewed them. And within qualitative research, you find themes, or sometimes you'll hear categories. And what that means is, again, this phenomenon that people describe to me continuously reemerged and emerged throughout their interview or throughout everyone that I interviewed. So in paper one, we found, and I'll literally say it verbatim because we use something called in vivo coding, because again, qualitative research now it's like up to my interpretation of what people are saying. And we know how Stephen can be awkward when he's actually sometimes serious, and some people don't read into that well. Well, that's the issue with qualitative research. So I use in vivo coding. So that's literally taking the participants' words and describing it that way. So the one theme, it's more about how I optimize my programming is, again, people are utilizing these wearables for their intended purposes of making adjustments to your programming. So if I get a poor readiness score, I'm going to, make a modification. I'm not going to go for a 1 rep max, or I'm not going to go with a long, hard run. And really interestingly, nobody ever said, I got a good score and I turned up. Nobody said that. So I thought that
Ooh.
was, it's interesting because
But they did dial back in response to it.
yeah, so the continuous finding there with people's experience was it was only in response to a bad score that they would dial back. Nobody ever said that, hey, if I got a green score, I did my exercise plus some, or, I had this exercise session and then I actually was like, no, I'm going to turn up a little bit more. Nobody said that. So I think that goes to say, at least in my population, that we follow typically what we follow because we typically set the bar a little bit hard or higher for us, but only is it when we're not feeling good and we have maybe a reinforcer with a wearable device. It's like, okay, we need to scale back a little bit. Not many people are turning up because we feel like maybe our program is already turned up enough. So I just thought that was really interesting because that's now the third study that has found that of people who will only back down, they won't turn up.
Well, do you think that, and this is probably an offshot and not something that this study in particular answers, but I mean, I find that just in general, people are much more they tend to talk about negative things more. They tend to notice negative things more. Like I can go through my day and have some really awesome things happen. And it actually takes me effort to like step back and say, oh, wow, these really great things happened today. Versus if something bad happened, even if it's a minor inconvenience, like I'm like, nope, I know exactly what happened at that minute and hour. And I remember it to the detail.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And then like, again, within the whole development of this project, like I developed an iGuide. So there's specific prompts. I keep it broad, but then there's specific like just like cues that I'm hearing for, or if I'm not hearing it, that I'm like, hey, can I probe you this way? And I would probe people like, okay, did you got a good recovery score? What happened with that? And people didn't do that. Yeah. So like, again, well, it says Misty here, so we'll call her Misty for right now. Misty would say, she, again, also never brought up that I'm going to turn up when I had a good score. It was more like that reinforcer of, no, like I feel good. This says I feel good. I'm just going to go about my day.
Right.
But it's an interesting question that you said. We are typically better at retrieving things that are more salient, which is unfortunately the negative aspects.
Now, I used to notice with my Whoop, though, there would be days where say there wasn't anything wrong. Like I wasn't sick where like I knew I was sick or like something had happened. There would be times where I would get a red recovery, and I was always bad about being like, fuck your red recovery. I'm going to go do what I'm supposed to do today. And then like keep doing that. And then there would be other times where I would get like a green and be like, that's insane. I feel like shit. Like this thing doesn't know what it's talking about. And that was kind of what got me like disenchanted with it to a certain point, was because those would happen probably like at least once a month, where there would be something like glaring where it was like, there's no way to go about that. And so I thought it was interesting having it, because it almost made me like push against when I would get red days or something where I'm like, you can't tell me what to do. And then I would like you said, execute anyways, because that's just, I think within specifically like our population of stuff, like we're just going to go do the plan majority of the times. But what you're saying with, people using that more so than using it as an opportunity to push, using that feedback as an opportunity to pull back, I think that kind of, I would see that a lot probably in like newer lifestyle, like clients coming into stuff maybe, or like people who are trying to get into it more that might not have as much experience, or maybe they don't have like a specific big goal that they're chasing, or they're not as deep into like, I want to improve maxes, or I'm trying to do this or whatever, where it serves as that like well, it said I don't have to, like, kind of thing, and then gives that feedback of like, well, I didn't really want to do this today. And it says today is not an optimal day of training anyways. And so I should probably wait and take that rest day. And I think that's the hard part with auto regulation in general, where that's almost like a concept with some people that, like, I'll be careful about bringing it up almost with like, I don't know if we're ready to use auto regulation, right? Where I'm
Yeah.
like, I just need you to learn to execute. And then once we know better, like, do I just not feel like this today? Or am I truly ready? Same thing with deloads. That's something that I don't automatically put into like everybody's stuff, because I feel like sometimes, maybe just after a big week of training and then every week it's like, I need a deload. And it's like, no, you got to keep going, like at least for a little bit. And so that's where I think sometimes it can be fuzzy for people if it's like, oh, well, it always tells me that like I haven't hit, like my Garmin tells me peaked on some days. Like if I haven't trained for like a full weekend, on Monday morning, it's going to tell me I've peaked and like I should go do like a crazy number of sprints and like things like that. But
Yeah.
I think, huh?
No, so I think what you're saying is, again, like not everyone is going to be ready to just auto regulate in general.
Right.
And I think it's a learning process for sure. And we have plenty of literature to support even the most trained individuals can't get this shit right. But again, these wearable devices are a secondary, objective, unbiased source that can really make us think of, am I really feeling like this or am I not? But to challenge like what you just literally explained from like, again, a behavioral standpoint, if people are continuously feeling like I need to deload or I need a rest day, are we maybe already putting too much of a demand on their exercise bout already?
Right.
If we're doing that as a coach, we need to scale back, because I rather tell me, hey coach, turn it up. Hey coach, turn it up. This isn't enough, because that again is telling me that, hey, we're right here. We're starting to create those positive experiences. They're starting to understand, hey, I got a hold on this. Challenge me a little bit more, rather than, again, man, you just beat the hell out of me and I don't want to do this anymore. And I need a rest day. Because again, the funny thing about exercise, this complex health behavior, it doesn't make you feel good usually doing it. But how do we usually feel better? Doing it. So that's like the hardest, that's like the toughest sell with this. So yeah, I
like
think
it makes you uncomfortable. It makes you feel bad, but it also makes you feel good and feel better. So it's like this weird, like, yeah, it sucks, but it's also like totally way awesome, dude.
It's
and
very
then what
like
we
nuanced.
what we continuously try to tell our clients or the population in general is that exact phrase, is this cognitive, rational, thought process of, no, it's good for you. It's good for you. Well, that hasn't worked. And we're continuously getting more obese. We're continuously getting more inactive. So it's, again, about developing an educational experience and a positive experience. And to kind of piggyback off what you had just described there, Christina, is right. Another finding, kind of, again, also picking back to Stephen's question, the other finding is it's a wearable. It's not God. It doesn't know everything. It's quantitative. It's not qualitative. And I think a lot of the autoregulatory research out there is fixated on quantitative outcomes. It wasn't like, yo, we just gave you the autonomy support to do what you thought you could do or wanted to do. How did that go? But right now we're kind of falling in the same trap of periodization literature, is linear versus undulating versus, I don't even know how many forms of periodization there is anymore, of, hey, it's all creating these, adaptations that we know are going to happen if you exercise. But again, going back to square one, people aren't doing this.
Yeah. And I think that, especially like if you're newer or you haven't exercised in a while, or, you just haven't done those things, sometimes like just doing something, even if it's like quote unquote not enough, like doing something is a step in the right direction. Doing something is a win. And I would say, like, I'm probably on the same boat. I think more often than not, I'm pulling back people that are like competitors or very competitive in their personalities, in terms of, yeah, they're probably going in and working really hard. And so for them, I want to err on the side of, all right, let's make sure that you're recovering well, which is obviously what these are really about, supporting. people paying attention to maybe, that heart rate variability, that physiological sign that many people have, will say, they kind of sense like, oh, I don't feel as good. They have that subjective measure of, oh, I feel strong today. I feel weak today. Ooh, my back is a little tweaked, like it's tight, those kind of things. And trying, like, the intent, I believe, is to try and get those people to pay attention to those physiological cues more so, given that HRV measure and that readiness score is actually in line and indicative with those things. Like, hey, stupid Stephen, like your readiness score is like a 22, your back is sore, your left and right shoulder are all ganked up like this, and you're going to go try and deadlift today. Like, stop being a dummy. Like, don't be a dingus, as Ryan would say, right?
Yeah, no, I think, again, what you're just explaining there is, again, another finding. It's validating, it's reinforcing, and again, tapping into what you are properly feeling. But us as athletes, us as trained individuals, we're taught to, hey, no, go hard or go home. And again, that's what the signs and the saying and phrases are repeatedly with exercise. No pain, no gain. How hard do you want it? How bad do you want it? If you're not willing to sacrifice or die, then this thing isn't for you. But these two wearable devices, the positive out of them is like, recovery is probably important. And what are you doing to enhance those things? A lot of the things that people mentioned to us was, sleep hygiene, hydration, all of the things that we know, nutrition, getting proper physical activity, body integrity. So again, the stretching, mobility, foam rolling was mentioned. All of these little things that sometimes are just like left on the wayside, those are really important. And the wearable device, was picking up that maybe these people were doing it, their HRV or all of these other physiological variables were picking up on that. Your score was getting higher. It's reinforcing and validating that, hey, I should probably do more of these things. And it's now reinforcing and validating that, hey, I also feel good when I do these things. I should probably do more things of those things.
That was probably my favorite thing about it, was like the journal. And over time, as I had it, because I had the Whoop I would wear it on and off for like 3 years. And so they added a lot more stuff to their journal over time. And I had it like pre-COVID and then post-COVID. And like that was interesting too, when they added in a lot of different data there. And then I'd worn mine pregnant and like through a delivery, like all sorts of different stuff, and like saw the crazy data. But two of the ones that like stuck out with me that like changed how I like behaved all the time was, so wine would set my Whoop off where like nothing else would, but I could have like a glass of Chardonnay at lunch and that would be it for a day. And my HRV and sleep scores would be shit for like 48 hours. And there was nothing else that would cause my body to react that way. And then, like you said, I would start paying attention when I was like, oh, I really do notice that I just feel off. Like if I have anything wine related. And then when it came to supplements, you can track a lot of those too. Like, did you take your vitamin C, your vitamin D, and magnesium and stuff like that? And magnesium was one where, I was taking stuff that was supposed to help with my sleep quality and recovery and everything. And it would
for you
completely, huh?
For you, right? So it's like, this was something that you as an individual noticed, right?
Yeah. So then when I would log it and say, yes, I did take it, because you would have to log like 30 days of a behavior or something like that, or like a certain amount of time before it would be like, hey, I have enough. Or it would be like my monthly report. And it would say like, okay, you logged it this many times. This is what we saw this often. And so like, then it would do like a green, yellow, red of like, this is good for you. This is not as good for you, or whatever. And for me, whenever I took magnesium and then I started playing with like different ones, it would just like mess shit up. And then so I was like, well, fine, I just won't bother. Like, and then everything would be okay after that. And so that was where like I stopped paying attention so much to like the readiness score, because I felt like I was always just going to fight mine anyways and do what I wanted to do. But when it came to how I was supporting all of the other stuff, like I did still want in general to see that number be green more often than red. So then I would pay attention to the behaviors, not the ones necessarily that made it green, but the ones that made it red. I would be like, okay, well, maybe I'll stop doing that, or maybe I'll adjust that somehow and fix that. And so that was where I found it to be most helpful was just paying attention to like, what are the things that are not serving me? Because I'm probably going to keep doing all of the other ones that we know serve us, like hydration, sleep, and like stuff like that.
So we're just going to allow you to keep talking because everything you just said there is another finding. It's putting the power in my hands. You're not just a passive recipient with this wearable. It's not like green score, go, red score, don't go. You figured out what was good for you. And Stephen said, for you, as you, an individual, magnesium was good. Alcohol just wasn't. But alcohol was like a repeated theme that continuously emerged with everyone. It was like, well, alcohol is, I noticed really quickly. I drank, oh man, it tanked my HRV, my sleep score, all of these things. But other individuals would say, well, whenever I had a massage or every I foam rolled or I stretched or actually took a day off, it was like, man, this worked, or I needed that reinforcement. So again, it's putting the power in your hands. You're starting to understand these outside phenomenon or behaviors and starting to connect the dots. It wasn't you just, going about your day, getting a green score and hoping for the best. You got in the data and you explored the data. And that's where I think, again, we have to almost think about how we're going to present the interface. Because another theme out there was, again, it sometimes is designed for more of an emotional response than a rational one, right? Because we're continuously, taught in school, anything below a C is bad. So some people connected a 70 or lower as I'm doing really bad, or other people's baseline or anchor was, anything lower than 90, I was really bad. So again, that's not always the best way to look at it. Or, if I had a red or a yellow score, I'm already thinking, ooh, I must be sick. Ooh, I must be doing, something bad. So it's that theme, in my opinion, of it's guiding you, it's putting the power in your hand, and you have to actually be an active recipient of it and not just taking it in at face validity and just hoping things will work out. And that's what we do as coaches, right? We start to connect the dots for you and we provide you options. And funny enough, right, the Whoop band users were a lot better at elaborating on the specific variables that help them because of that journal component. The Oura Ring doesn't really have something like that, at least when I did it. I don't know if it's improved since, but more of the Oura Ring users were like, man, you really just talked me out of wearing this thing. I don't know why I'm paying so much money for it. Or again, same thing with the Whoop band users was like, well, I think this actually has maybe reached its point where, I've learned and I've maximized all of the things that I can get from it. So maybe I don't need to be using it anymore. But I think what Stephen said earlier, I'm not sure if it's part one or part two, was, maybe there's specific times within our life, prep, competitive season, that, hey, maybe having that objective, unbiased source can really be, valuable and useful. But when we're in the off season, we don't need to be overloaded with data because we can just stick to, hopefully, the behaviors that we have gained to become habits within a more structured, approach. So I think, again, it's useful, but sometimes it can be an overburden for some people that aren't actually getting in within the data and letting it just control everything.
And one thing I will say that I liked about the Oura Ring is they actually have a lot of like guided meditation, stress management stuff in there. So they actually have those as part of your monthly subscription, which I think is really cool. Because I think the hard part about a lot of the stuff is, so the Whoop, obviously I haven't used, but does the journaling and stuff. It gives you the opportunity to maybe look a little bit more in depth at kind of the totality of what you're doing. But if my Oura Ring just says that I keep sleeping bad and I have a terrible readiness score, but I don't know how to fix that, and I know I'm getting ahead of us to one of the other things, like that's going to stress me out, and that's going to give me a negative affect, or AFECT, right? It's going to put me into a spot where I'm going to be less likely to exercise. I'm going to be more likely to be frustrated. I'm now also probably going to be less likely to maybe use that on a regular basis because it's always giving me negative reinforcement at that point. And so, like, I like the idea that the Whoop band has more of that stuff, because I feel like for most people, and I'll put my athletes in this category, I'll put a ton of people in there. Their main issue is not like, oh man, I'd be training too hard all the time. Some of them, yeah. But their main issues tend to be like stress related. Right. It's
Yeah.
that their lifestyle is in a spot, and maybe it's work, family, a mixture of everything, trying to do all the stuff, a failure to be able to set healthy boundaries with, whoever and whatever. Their stress and anxiety tends to create more issues for them than anything else. But that's not an easy thing to address, nor is it something that your HRV score is going to be like, yo, guess what? You need to work on your relationship with your mom, and that's going to improve your sleep score. Or, you know what I mean? Like,
you know what's so funny though is like that the journal literally would dive into things as deep as like, did you have a dog sleep in your room last night? Do you have a cat that sleeps in your room? Did you have a conversation with a family member? Like it would cover, like, did you give a presentation at work today? Like you could have it set to ask you like 100 questions or something like that. Or there could be ones where like were normal for your day. So like part of your routine where like, oh, did you make sure to drink this much water? And so then, you could like narrow it down, but you had access to all of the other ones. But what you just said about like the other lifestyle factors, that's kind of where like earlier when I was saying like with some people, I'm like, okay, well, maybe you don't need this kind of feedback, or like maybe you don't need to stress about trying to handle your own auto regulation right now, is not because I'm like, everybody should rub their face into the ground with their training and like work crazy hard with it, but more so that like often that's not the issue that we're running into. And it's not that you shouldn't go train because your training is way too hard or something. It's because we have all this other stuff that like, I need you to go work on like that too, but then we should build this good habit. And that's where it can be hard, because I think sometimes, if it says like the way the Whoop would put it is your strain. And if it's like, oh, well, your morning routine, getting the kids off to school this morning provided, a 12 of strain, which for me can be the same as going on a, 90-minute run. I can end up with the same strain score because my heart rate goes crazy yelling at kids to get in the car. But, it's more regulated and endurance for the thing, and so it doesn't see it as like it'll give it the same score even though like one's different than the other. And so I think that can be that is surprising about the Oura. I just kind of assumed that it was doing the same thing, because when the people would ask me, should I get one, I would always explain it that way, where I'm like, don't let the strain and the recovery scores run your life, because sometimes they're just not going to make sense. If anything, like the journal is where it's at, and like pay attention to how those things affect your life and like actually go through and use it, because otherwise it's like my sleep number bed telling me what my HRV was. Like I don't trust it. But all of those other things, I think, I had some clients that were like, I've been told forever that I shouldn't be having, 3 glasses of wine each night after work. But like that really showed me that when I don't have it, like that was a big change. Or like you said, like introducing rest days and having people really see like, oh yeah, if I don't, use my active rest day to go still do like a Zumba class and then go on a hike and I actually sit down, things do get way better and I feel better in my training. Like, I think that journal 100% is the most important thing. But then like Adam said, I definitely got to a point where I was like, I feel like I've maxed out what this is going to tell me. And I don't necessarily like, I don't need to know more from it. But I was actually the opposite way, where I felt like the data it told me during like a marathon prep or something like that, it didn't matter what it had to say, because my workouts were scheduled and I had to get a certain number of miles done during the week, and I had a calendar date at the end. And so no matter what it said, I was going to keep going. Whereas between preps for like that kind of stuff, that was where I would focus more on like what it was telling me and kind of implement it. Cause I was like, now I have the time to focus on you and fix the lifestyle aspects a little bit, and then just have them carry over into the next prep as best I could.
Yeah. And I think, to piggyback off that, the end phase, I mean, Stephen, I've heard you say it plenty of times, is you better have everything aligned up before you enter a prep phase.
Oh yeah. Right.
If not, you're just not going to be successful. And
Bad.
when you are in prep, it doesn't matter how you feel. Sure, we can do refeed and diet breaks. And I think nowadays too many people make prep to be this lolly-dolly, phase. And it's like, no, it can be. We can try to minimize the negative experience as much as we can, but to a point, it's no, you need to you need to be competitive, and you're going to have to do things that you wouldn't do outside of, a competition phase. And exactly what you said, there's times where you can actually listen and be a little bit more flexible and listen to that wearable. And there's other times it's like, no, use it as feedback, maybe adjust certain variables. But at the end of the day, no, you're 4 weeks out from a show. You got to do this damn thing. You made that decision.
Right.
Yeah, and I think for me, it gets to, and nobody else is going to understand this except for Adam and myself, because he sent me his papers to review. It's like the theme 3 on paper 2, right? And I think that's the difference of, like, if you guys talk about competitors and stuff, the idea or the hope with most of our competitors and people doing those things is that they have all of those kind of base habits down. We don't have to worry about if they're drinking, enough fluids per day.
Right.
We don't have to worry about if they're making sure that sleep is a priority and they're getting at least 6 hours of sleep per night. We don't, like, those things are not question marks. So since we get to assume, which isn't always fair and oftentimes or sometimes can get us into trouble, that they have all of those, like, lifestyle factors down and in. And I think that that's why, like, this one and this part of the conversation really reaches, like, hits me with that theme 3 of more of an emotional response rather than a rational one, is because as just everyday people, we might not have all of those things down, and we might not know how to get them down. So, like, and I didn't realize that the Whoop had the journaling because I had never used one before, obviously. But it can make it almost frustrating to a degree to be like, okay, well, I know I need to fix this thing, but then how? Right? Or, like, I don't know what it is exactly that's making the impact here. So now I'm having this emotional, and obviously it could be the other way around, same thing. But kind of what you got at earlier was that nobody saw they had a green score and was like, hell yeah, brother, PRER, let's go. You know what I mean? Like, so it just,
and
it
as
makes
we talk about that, I think I want users to understand too, with exercise science literature, right now, all it is, and for the most part, is mean, standard deviations, and aggregate data from a group of pooled individuals that are relatively similar. Unfortunately, they're mostly undergrads or, campus, they're convenient samples. But I think more and more, because there's more and more individuals calling for individualized programming within research, you're going to start seeing more individualized data. It's more statistical modeling. It's all of these more advanced techniques, but that's what we freaking need. And that's what we do as coaches here at ProPhysique. We look at you at the individual. We're not giving you this one size fits all approach that, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that do that shit. But we want you to explore. We want you to learn. And more importantly, I think, at least for all of my clients, at least what I started to do in the past, like, 6 months, is after every workout, talk to yourself or have a journal. Let me know what the hell you just learned. Let me know what the hell you just did. Because everything I've prescribed, I say now, is in pencil. If things aren't feeling a certain way, you have the flexibility and autonomy to do it. Try to make it, as consistent as possible. But if you made a choice, I need you to explain, like, defend yourself. Don't just do it to do it, but defend and try to explain why you needed to do that. Because in the future, when this happens again, you can understand why you're doing these things, rather than just like, I just wasn't feeling it. I was like, well, there's a lot of days where I'm just not feeling it, but there's things that you have to do and push through. But if it's at a point where you need to do it, you better defend to me why you're doing these things. And again, that's the educational model that we as coaches at ProPhysique are trying to do for our guys.
Yeah, and I think part of that is, like, the resiliency factor too, because it gets into, and I don't know why, I feel like I haven't been cussing on stuff as much lately, but I feel like it goes into the idea of the fuck it's, the all or nothings, right? And I think that does a lot of harm. And hopefully we think, these wearables and having that information and data allows us to find more of that gray area. Because the people who are the most successful in their fitness goals or weight loss goals or health goals, there is no, like, I've never read in the ACSM that the exercise guidelines are, 30 minutes of cardiovascular exercise at moderate intensity for 5 days a week for 3 months, and then you can go fuck off for the next 6 months. Like, it doesn't say that, right? So
right.
It's not about, like, okay, we can do this for a short amount of time and then piss right off, like, we're good to go do whatever we want. It's how do we facilitate that we have those healthy habits so that we can do that continually. So maybe, yes, you're not having the best day. Maybe, yes, it's not a 5-star, right? It's 2 for 10, would not recommend, but you can get through it. Cool. Well, how do we manage that day to where we still get something done? We're still successful. We still focus on healthy habits for our lifestyle. Yeah, maybe we do just take the dogs for an extra walk. All right, cool. That's what we had in the tank today. That's acceptable. That's all right. And that keeps us accountable to those things for the long term. And guess what? Now you're not burnt out as much. Like it's helping, or hopefully it's helping you to recognize those things so you can say, all right, the goal should be, how do I make this for me as an individual realistic for a lifetime?
Yeah. And so I think with that though, and this is always a hard one to explain to like to a client or like to somebody, and not have it feel like offensive, I guess, because I feel like that comes down to maturity in what you're in, right? Like your maturity in your relationship to what you've chosen to do. And like,
it's coachability. It's coachability.
yeah,
Not, I don't even say maturity. It's like you're handing the reins to me. Like you're paying me. You came to me. If you're not going to try to listen to me, then shoot. But one of my favorite things to do with clients is like, okay, you've told me all of these things, but you want to do the same damn thing for what? Or it's like, okay, let's go ahead and do it. And hopefully through these reflective processes that, we do, they're starting to actually put the pieces together. You know what? That shit didn't make sense. I don't know why I want to do it again. But sometimes it's them having to come to it. And I think, fortunately, I think we had this conversation a long time ago, and it really stuck with me. It's like, I'm really more affirmative with what my protocols or principles are. And I'm not bending that because, it's worked. And if you're not willing to work with me, go see somebody else. Unfortunately, go waste your money on a poor coach that's just going to run you through the dirt. And you're going to come back to me. And guess what? Now, instead of having a reverse or a maintenance phase of 6 months, we got to do it for 2 years because you just wouldn't listen.
Right. And that's where I think it comes down to when they're setting goals with stuff too, like being able to have a conversation where we can get outside of just the immediate, like emotional and aesthetic goals of a situation, because I think that's what causes the most problems is like, because I've had clients where they were like, well, I'm going to get this wearable because so-and-so said that when they got better quality sleep and their stress went down, that they just instantly dropped like 4 pounds. And then like this happened or something. And I'm like, we cannot approach everything for the rest of our lives with how is this going to make me, for women, the smallest version of myself, and then be able to maintain that and things like that. And so if we're coming at, the auto regulation of, okay, well, all I have in me is a walk today, or like for the month of October, basically, like I'm coming towards the end of a big like mesocycle where we're going to be like retesting maxes. And I'm super excited to do that because I know my numbers are going to be way higher than they were. But every single one of my workouts lately has been so daunting where I'm like, fuck, like I don't want to do that. I don't want to squat that much today. Like this is going to suck. And I know it's going to be uncomfortable. And I mean, sometimes it's exciting, but like for whatever reason this month, it's just been more of like, let's just do it. Like just shut up and do the first couple of sets and you'll be fine moving into it. And I think it helps that it's not just an aesthetic goal, like with things. And that's where I think the relationship with fitness and with the gym and wearables and macro tracking and like all of that kind of stuff has to mature outside of the immediate, I want to lose weight or I want to have my shoulders look this way or something like that. And it has to grow into, well, I want to make sure that, my 10-year-old and I realized that he's too big for me to carry anymore. And so him and I thought it would be funny for me to pick him up and carry him around the kitchen so I could prove that like, even though he's almost as tall as me, like we still haven't hit that date where mom doesn't carry him anymore. And like, I want to be able to do that, like as he gets bigger, or I want to beat him in a foot race. Or you were talking about the flexibility thing. Like I've done private lessons with my kids' cheer coaches so that I can learn to do the splits at 36. And let me tell you, that kicked my ass. That would have 100% had a strain score. I was like sweating and my heart rate was so high. And so, I think that as it grows into something where it's like, I want this to be a lifestyle of longevity and capability and things like that, outside of, like Stephen said, oh, well, I did this for 3 months. And even if they're looking at health markers, like I've had clients, they wanted to get their A1C down or like something like that. And it's like, okay, cool. Well, I lost 15 pounds and that blood panel looked that way. So I think I'm cool. And this weekend I'm going to go have this like big a celebratory dinner and like all of that. And then you start to see like, oh shit, if they go off on their own with this, like the next blood panel is probably going to have it up again. Like, we haven't nailed that down yet to keep going with it. And that's where I think, if they are tracking it and using the data, like you said, it can cause lasting stuff if they really look into it. But I know I had clients even who had those and they were just like, this thing's broken. It tells me my recovery is always bad. And I was like, but did you change anything like to fix it? And like, that's the hard part.
Yeah, behavior change is complex, especially when it comes to, exercise or dietary habits. But like you had said, these are two complex health behaviors that if you want to reap any benefit that you do in the 3 to 6 months, that you're going to have to continuously do those things for the rest of your life. So it might make sense for you to become an educated dieter, an educated exerciser, and realize that flexibility and adaptability and resiliency are 3 traits that you want to be able to develop with this. Because if you're not, again, life is really uncertain, it's unpredictable. And if you can't respond to those things, this is going to be really hard. But at the end of the day, as Stephen said, it's really not that hard. There's too many people out here are selling this magic bullet, magic pill, magic program, but just get up and fucking move. And I think that slowly but surely will increase your fitness level, where you can increase the intensity or what variety of your exercise, but you have to start somewhere. And once you find that entry point, and if you're consistently doing that, your options will continuously open up.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people also look at, people who are doing extremes, right? So I love to think back, and I think this is a great example because you and I both used to powerlift together and compete against one another, right? And so there was a time where, some of my lifts were better than yours, and then like you had a better squat than I had, but my deadlifts rocked yours. And now you're deadlifting more than me, and I don't deadlift at all anymore, right? So we both still can do stuff, but being on that end in terms of strength sports requires a lot of consistency and dedication. It requires, like, I can't just go deadlift once a month and still be deadlifting 600 plus pounds, weighing in at 180. Like, it ain't going to happen anymore. And so, it's also this idea of, I think a lot of times it's easy for us to look at people that are at the far end of the spectrum in terms of, higher like performance athletics, maybe the physiques and that kind of stuff. And it's cool to have something to aspire to, but it's also one of those things that we have to take and look at our lifestyles and recognize, is it realistic for me to be in the gym for 2 hours per session for 5 lifts or 6 lifts? Is it realistic for me to be doing an hour of cardio every day? Is that good for me? Is that going to be something I can manage long-term or any of that kind of stuff? Because for most people, the answer is no. And that's why we have athletic careers. And that's why our athletic careers end at a specific point in time that has passed. And so I do think that, because, and I'm trying to like bring it back to maybe some of the sub themes. It's important to be, because this one was the sub theme of I'm in more in tune with my body right now, right? Like it helps you to recognize more of what's actually going on, to be in tune and to listen to that with the wearables. But I think it's also important to understand that when you set your fitness, physique goals, weight loss, whatever, that you're also in tune with where you're at in life. Because I've seen so many people that are maybe very type A, maybe very, very numbers driven or goal driven specifically. And they can take these things and instead of being a helpful tool to where it benefited them, it is now a tool that they become obsessive about and it kind of rules their life.
100.
And now it's like, hey, dude, like I said, it's not God. It's a thing. The scale, it doesn't determine worth, it doesn't determine value, shouldn't be ruling our lives. It's just a measure of mass. It's just a thing. And so I don't know that you really saw a lot of people with those kind of negative connotations with it in this study. Is that right?
Yeah, what you're explaining, no, nobody's elaborated on that way, but I think you've hit the nail on the head though. Like, in tune with your body of understanding what is going to contribute to readiness and recovery score, but also being in tune with where you're at, who you are, and your ultimate goal. I think that was a really hard swallow for me in my PhD, especially, going into my third year of, I've at least competed at least twice at this time point in this year, but with comps, with writing these papers, teaching, it's like, you're just not going to have the time to really give it your all. And that would just piss me off more. So I'm in tune with where I'm at. I'm not going to be able to go in the gym maybe as frequent or as the duration that I would need to get ready for a competition. So that's me saying, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to get healthy with some of the naggers that have been dealt with me. And there's other ways to be involved in the sport. Like, I can judge and ref, right? You can do all of these things. Like, hey, I'm a retired athlete. You see all of these football players do it. Now they're analysts, or now they have their own podcast, or they're still involved within the sport, just in a different way, so they can give back and hopefully allow the other individuals that come through the sport to be better and learn from those mistakes. So I think that's a great point that a lot of us forget, that, hey, your chapter 5 through 15 is now over, but your chapter 16 through 30 could be about giving back to the others that are now trying to learn from your other chapters.
And you can still be a good example in that. You can still be healthy in that. You can still have a lot of really, just good habits along with that, which is really, for me, my hope would be for the wearables in general, is that they're helping us to create good, healthy habits. They're helping us to support and continue and upkeep those good, healthy habits that allow us to have that readiness score, right? That heart rate variability, whatever it might be, as accurate or inaccurate as it may be for us as an individual, in a good spot. Because we would say that the same things that are going to help to achieve that goal should help us to eat fruits and veggies,
right?
Get fibrous and unprocessed food sources, sleep a good enough amount, be properly hydrated, have some semblance of exercise and activity. Like, all those things are part of that. And so it helps us to really kind of hopefully make that transition from maybe some less healthy and less beneficial behaviors and lifestyle decisions towards those like more positive lifestyle choices that are going to benefit not only health, but like independence as we age and all that other kind of like cool stuff that we know comes along with that none of us like thinking about, because it means I have to realize that I'm going to be old sometime, and that like, oh God, what's old Stephen going to be like if like middle-aged Stephen's already this terrible?
Yeah, and I think the best way to really put that in front of somebody's face, and I took this from Dr. T and I present it to my students, is reverse engineer your life. What the hell do you want to do when you're 100 years old? Okay, you say you want to do XYZ. Sorry?
Be dead. I want to be dead when I'm 100.
Okay, well, I don't want to be dead. I want to be 100 years old, and I still want to be that 100 years old, that video that's circulating the internet of still deadlifting 500 pounds. So like, I still want to do those things. So like, it's now reverse engineering what you need to do to be that age to do that thing. Again, it's putting yourself in that awkward or tough conversation thought process and try to, again, think about what you can start on doing now to get there. A lot of people don't start there. Again, like Christina said, it's about, how can I lose this 10 to 15 pounds as quick and as fast as possible? And it's like, I can do that for you, but tell me what the hell that experience was like, or tell me where you're at in 6 months now. Like, social media says before and after pictures, but what is more powerful to me is the after picture. Like, okay, you just did a reverse picture or reverse dieting. What's that picture look like now? Are you still doing all of the habits and behaviors that took you to get to your current spot? If you're not, I failed you as a coach, or we failed to, again, transform your life for the better, right? The whole goal of having a coach is not to need them, but to want them. Maybe you need them now, but eventually it's just it's a want. It's, you see shit that I sometimes don't see. You see me getting emotional rather than rational, and you pull me back. And that is sometimes, again, we all have cognitive biases, we all have heuristics, and sometimes you need that. And that's something like recently I've been dealing with like a hip injury, and I felt myself getting really emotional. I was like, yo, Chris, yo, Parker, yo, Raul, tell me something that can tell me to shut the fuck up. And we need that because it's really easy to get emotional with these things because they're hard, they're complex, it's just something that is not given, you know, the complexity sometimes it needs to be given to a lot of these individuals. It's not eat less and move more, because if it was that easy, we wouldn't be in this specific situation we're in right now.
I also hope that I hope that every time that you complain to Chris, he just sends you a picture of me. He's like, like, hey, check it out. Steven's here in the rehab clinic rehabbing his ACL tear or like his ACL reconstruction. And he's just like, ah.
Yeah, definitely. Again, I think, again, what you're doing, and then even Kyle, what he's doing with his torn Achilles, that's really inspiring. When there's a will, there's always a way. I mean, he's coming back from a torn ACL, or Kyle is literally in a boot and a cast right now, but he's still figuring it out to exercise. And again, that just goes to show how adaptive and flexible this behavior can be. Just because you're hurt or just because you're sore and tired, like go for the walk, do something else that, again, allows you to get something in. And I think that's like the number one point that hopefully you'll hear throughout this series is something is always better than nothing. Just make it fun, make it enjoyable.
Yeah. Racking up those wins, I think, is a big one. Like, instead of just like, I survived the day, I try to talk to clients a lot about like, but what did you do to like make yourself like proud today? Like, what was the extra little thing? It doesn't have to be huge. Like, were you crazy busy? Then like maybe you walked the dog and like now he's happy and not making you like nuts running around the house, and you got outside, and like that can be enough. But it just comes down to, you know, I think especially when people hire coaches, right? And like you talked about with coachability and with the wanting the coach and stuff like that, it should be something where like you've picked a path where you want to check those boxes, or you want to say, I couldn't do all of it, but I did try this, and like have that growth mindset with it of, I'm still trying. I didn't throw in the towel on today, you know? And I mean, that's
a tough swallow as a coach though. And that was plenty of conversations that I had with Stephen early on in my career. It was like, man, he's not doing this. He's not being able to figure this out. And I'm trying everything. And he's like, some people just, it's not the right time for them. And that's not you, Adam. And I'm like, yeah, you're right.
It is. And I think that's why, like, I tell people all the time too, like, coaches have coaches, like when they'll be in their inquiry calls and they'll bring things up where they're like, I feel like I've done everything, or I've tried this and like this and that. And they can't quite see, like you said, like the emotional part, or, you know, like where they're kind of hitting their head against the wall the entire time and not letting themselves get past it. You need to have that outside person where, like, I mean, I thought I was going to coach myself into my next marathon, and already I was like, it's time to find somebody, because I can't get myself like pushed the same way, or, you know, you try to change programming or like things like that. I'm like, nope, I'm ready to just hand it to someone and be like, tell me what to do. Like, and I'll just do it.
Also, way to hit me in the feels, jerk. Ugh. Oh. Said something that mattered. But that goes into the self-determination.
I think a lot of this
theory,
goes
right?
to, sorry, my bad.
No, so it goes back into the self-determination theory, which obviously you kind of mention in the studies of like how people go back and forth to like being ready and not being ready, and, you know, like maintenance and stuff. And I think that's the other thing is like, it's gonna be tougher at first, but just like anything else, once you start getting good at it, it becomes much less upkeep. It becomes much less mental stress. And that's why you want to like kind of take it maybe one thing at a time, and take your time and walk in those maybe smaller steps to where they're more attainable or feasible. And again, that comes back to looking at where you're at in life and what's reasonable for you to do, and say, okay, well, maybe we can't do all of it at once, but we can do this, and it's going to get us a little bit closer to where we want to be.
Yep, 100%. Adam, do you have any closing thoughts on wearables in general? With, because have you had one, or just listen to everybody else talk about it?
Yeah, no, I think the funny thing about coming up with the study was, again, it was really from the systematic review that I did on meta session autoregulation. So, and then a previous study of taking this complex construct of readiness and having people developing a subjective phenomenon into an objective measure, a person adaptive profile, and present it to these people. And they're like, I don't buy it because, again, my wearable device will say this and I don't agree with this. So it's like, shit, we need, again, developing a lane of research, we need to figure out this problem before we can just go to an RCT. So exploring this phenomenon, how people are utilizing it, and that will, hopefully refine and better equip my next project. So I think my overall message with wearable devices and just self-monitoring in general, and I would even go as far as saying now, exercise science research, stop being post-positive, or better yet, stop being just objective with what you're doing. Connect the objective and subjective. Have a mixed method approach of, right, I'm self-monitoring, I'm collecting all of this objective data, but subjectively, what did you learn? How did it make you feel? What was your motivation? All of these other variables, like you just said with the journaling piece, right? There's 100 options. Pick 5, maybe even less than that, but defend and talk out loud what is actually happening. Because if we're not understanding that, what we're doing may not actually stick with you long term. And that's where, again, we're trying to start to understand a lot of these experiences, because we know exercise is good. We know physical activity is good. We know you're going to have adaptations. We know these things. Like physiologically, we know that is going to happen. But what we don't know is the individual process to get to almost sustaining and attaining that. And that's where, hopefully, again, my dissertation and all the other future work that, knock on wood, my future career will unlock for people. But at the end of the day, it's a wearable. It's not God. Make sure you're an active participant rather than just a passive one. Because if you're a passive one, you're just going to get frustrated and you probably won't learn as much as you think you could.
Yep. Word. I dig it. Stephen, you got anything else for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in similar thought process, all things have the opportunity or ability to do good or to do bad. And so you have to take all those things with a grain of salt and understand that even though this thing may have an opportunity to do good for you, it may not necessarily do good for you. Or it may not be something that you quite understand or are ready for yet in terms of maybe what's going on for you as an individual. How my sleep sucks. How do I make it better? Well, we might not have that answer yet, but we might find that as we go on. So maybe now is not the time for you to use this. Maybe it'll be a good tool for us later. And I think it goes back to kind of what Adam talks about. The research is we want research to be definitive, but there are still outliers in research. And we are looking at normally one very specific thing in a lot of the quantitative research, like numbers, right? This exercise program does this in this many weeks for this much muscle or this much fat loss or blah, 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 blah. But what works best in the long term is how do we keep people consistent over time and doing it for a lifetime? So we have to try and cater what we do to that. So these bands, these rings, they may give you the opportunity to look at how you as an individual can better cater those things to yourself as well. And I think that's where the most opportunity lies in these for positives, is for figuring out how do we figure out how to use the data that this is giving us to pay attention to how we make exercise and healthy habits more realistic, more attainable, and like more long-term in our own personal lives, which will look different than, from one to another.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that goes back a lot to what, like, in general, I just try to talk to clients about going into anything that we're taking on, whether it's like learning a new device or a new program or whatever, like come at it with the idea that this is probably going to take longer than you think it's going to, and with an open mind and positivity, because you're not going to frustrate or hate yourself into a better situation. And so if you go at it that way, then you will probably come out of it with something that you learned or fixed or something along those lines, as opposed to just expecting it to be a quick fix and, not put that effort in. Like that effort piece always comes back, right? Where we probably have to put in more than we anticipated.
I want to put in zero effort.
You act that way, but
all rewards.
All of it. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. Hopefully we can do another one of these soon where, Adam can say a whole bunch of big words to us, and then we can have him break them down for us and learn more together and come up with some ideas. So if you guys have anything, if you're either on if you're listening to the audio version, or if you're on YouTube, leave us a comment and let us know if you have some ideas about, maybe there's something out there that has been more kind of like in the weeds, exercise science wise. And I mean, it's been a long time, but once upon a time, I read a whole bunch of those for my own master's. And so I need to turn this back on. And so maybe we could dive into a little bit more of topics like that if people did want to hear kind of like more of the like technical side of things. But just keep us posted, leave a thumbs up or a review, because it helps us out a whole lot. All of our emails are just our name @ProPhysique, or just reach out and I can try and get you connected if you have questions for any coaches. All right, guys, talk to you soon.
Bye.